If you enjoy picking up the phone and talking to end users to make or close a sale, but you lack the skills, experience, or the script to do so, this is the interview you need to watch. And if you don't like calling people, like me, this is the interview that will provide a roadmap, tactics, and the confidence you need to do so. This show is all about outbound domain name sales. Stay tuned. 3 messages before today's show. First, if you're a domain name investor, don't you have unique legal needs that require domain name technical know-how and industry experience? That's why you need David Westlow of Wiley Ryan. Go search for David Westlow on Domain Sherpa, watch his interviews, and you can see for yourself that he is intelligent and articulate, can help you with buy-sell agreements, deal with website content issues and UDRP actions, and can even help you write your website terms and conditions. David Westlow is the lawyer to call for all your internet and intellectual property needs. See for yourself at newmediaip.com. Second, when you have questions about domain names, where should you go to ask them? The answer is dnforum.com. Not only is DN Forum the largest domain name forum in the world, but it's the best. You can learn about domain names in the industry, buy and sell domain names, talk about domain name news, and meet other domainers just like yourself. Register for a free DN Forum account and begin advancing your skills and knowledge today. And when you do sign up, send me a friend request so we can connect. My ID is Domain Sherpa. Finally, whenever I'm thinking of buying or selling a domain name, the very first place I go is estibot.com. Their service provides quick and comprehensive information about the valuation and the critical factors that you need to know about, like other extensions that are reserved, recent sales, search volume, and cost per click rates on search engines. And if you haven't tried their lead generator service for domains you want to sell, you're missing one of the most powerful tools around. Those are the reasons I pay for the service every month. Here's your program. Hey everyone, my name is Michael Seiger and I'm the publisher of DomainSherpa.com, the website where you come to learn how to become a successful domain name entrepreneur or investor directly from the experts. I received an email from Sean Herndon the other week. He said he found information on how to do outbound sales emails to end user, and we've done some great shows in the past with Adam Dicker, Andrew Rosner, and others. You can look through the archives. But he couldn't find anything on calling customers or speaking to end users and how that relates to emails that you send. He was right, so we're going to fix that. Thanks for your email, Sean, and thanks to Jason Boshoff for putting me in contact with this show's guest. Today, we're going to dig into a successful domain name broker's sales process, including both emails and telephone calls, and figure out why he's successful so you can begin to do the same. Today we're joined by Joe Uddeme, Director of Business Development at Domain Holdings. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. Happy to be here.
Oh man, Joe, at least I didn't screw up your name. I was so worried about that I screwed up the beginning of the sentence.
No problem at all.
Joe Uddeme. All right, Joe, I'm excited to have you here today. We've all had domains that we want to sell, but many like me, we don't have a process or tactics to get the job done. I'm personally scared to email or worse yet, call people out of the blue and ask them to buy a domain name that I may own. So let me start by asking you about what you've done, and then we'll find out how you do it, and maybe I'll get over my fear of sales in the process.
Great.
If you look at just 2012, last year's sales, what you personally did, Joe, what was your total dollar volume of domain names sold?
So for last year, 2012, the total dollar amount that I was able to bring in for my company was approximately $7.5 million in sales.
Wow.
And that would range from the very low end of the spectrum all the way up to 7-figure deals. It was a very successful year for Brokerage at Domain Holdings, and I was happy to be a part of that.
Yeah, and so for, let's just call it $7.5 million in sales, how many transactions, how many individual domain names would you estimate that is?
At the minimum, it was 100 transactions. I actually don't usually go back and count. On average, somewhere between 10 to 12 transactions per month,
Hmm.
sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. There were package deals, certainly portfolios that we don't count. But for the most part, a minimum of 100.
So basically, if I were to just rough calculation, you're doing 2 to 4 deals a week that close?
Exactly. That's exactly right. Sometimes more, sometimes a little bit less. And different times of the year, you get different activities. So, like January is typically a slower month, so is
Hmm.
December.
Right.
So it just depends on the opportunity. And really, like I always say, it's all about putting yourself in the middle of the transaction.
Definitely. So what if January and December are slow months because people are on holiday, they've spent their money, they're in January, they're thinking about, their strategic plan for the year, so they may not understand what that spending money on a domain name might be worthwhile at that point. What are the fast months? What are the months that transactions are just happening left and right?
Well, I can't say that we ever have a specific month where transactions are really flowing. What I can say is that typically, or at least based on my experience and my team's experience, the spring months are very strong.
Mm-hmm.
That would be March, April, and May. And then certainly there's a little bit of a lull during the summer, but then it picks back up as the fall approaches. Typically, September, October, pretty strong. And then November, you'll see a little bit of activity. And then there's still deals to be had in December. It's just a question of getting in front of the right decision maker.
Right, right. And maybe even priming the pump so that later on or early in the next year that the deal will actually close.
That's exactly right. We work on our pipeline. I'm working on my pipeline right now for March, April, and May. So again, some of these deals take months to
Yeah.
materialize and get done. So it definitely takes some time.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you'll do deals all the way up to the seven figures. So we're talking about 1 million to just below $10 million. What's your sweet spot for domain names? What's sort of the minimum domain name price that you'll broker, and what's the maximum that you have brokered in the past? Because you probably have no upper bound limit.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there are, I think the short answer for a question like that is that, I'm going to spend the same amount of time on a domain that I'm marketing for $5,000 as I will on a domain that I'm marketing for $500,000.
Mm-hmm.
What I need to do is that I have to kind of pick and choose my battle. Um, Typically, I'll focus on assets that are priced somewhere between $10,000 on up to about $500,000.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, on the lower end of that spectrum, we have an easier sales process and an easier sales cycle. But that's not always the case. So you still have to do the same digging. You still have to reach the same end user.
Yeah.
It just depends on timing and what the asset is really.
And so when you say $10,000 is sort of the lower limit, is that $10,000 for the actual sales price, or is that sort of the starting point? So let me give you an example. I've got a domain name that I think I would take anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 for, but I'm going to price it at $10,000, so I've got some negotiation room in there. Would that be a domain name that you would prefer not to broker because it'll probably sell in the 3,000 to 5,000 range, or because I'm setting a price of 10,000 to start with, it would fit with what you broker?
Well, for the most part, I mean, if I have a relationship with a client who I've been working with for a while, and once in a while they approach me with an asset that might be priced around $5,000, if I think we can position that in the low five-figure range, I'll go ahead and do that
Mm-hmm.
and see if I can get a higher amount to extract for them. I might automatically have an end user that I've already worked with in the past that might be a perfect fit. So instead of me having to do all of the legwork and go out and try and find a new buyer, it's already set up. The buyer's already been established. In which case, I'll say to you, "Hey, Mike, $5,000. I can probably move that today." In which case, I don't have to do the extra work to
Right.
build the leads for that.
Got it. So if I've got a domain name I'm willing to sell for high wholesale or low retail, let's say that it maybe has a wholesale value of 3,000 to 5,000 and a retail value of 10,000. I can call you up. While it may not be in your sweet spot, you may know of another person that could immediately purchase it that you've worked with in the past, so you may take that on.
That's exactly right. And then, in addition, because we have 8 full-time brokers in house, my team is always there to help me. So if
Yeah.
I have more inventory that I can handle, what I'll do is I'll either put them in touch, the client in touch with one of my colleagues, or I will recommend pricing to one of my colleagues and see if they can lend and assist. They might have an end user that fits perfectly for the domain. So we have that opportunity to really go in and see if we can make the match.
Got it.
Yes.
Any particular industries or markets that you focus on specifically?
I have a lot of experience in the retail sector. Before I started getting into the domain world, I really focused on retail. I spent a good portion of my life in retail. And as a result, I like the e-commerce stuff. But we do have a lot of buyers in the insurance, education space, really every major niche vertical that's out there. Again, I think I mentioned this previously, but it's all about a puzzle. And what we do is we try and put the pieces together of the puzzle to find the suitable buyer for the name.
Yeah, great. All right, so let's dig into the details of your process.
Sure.
Does your process start with a seller approaching you and asking for help selling a domain name?
It's a great question. Typically, or I shouldn't say typically, but sometimes what will happen is we'll have an end user that's looking to perform a stealth acquisition. So they'll reach out to us directly and say, hey, by the way, we're in this space and we're looking for a moving domain. And what I'll do is then I'll go into the market, I'll see what type of inventory is available, and then I'll bring that inventory back to the buyer. But in some instances, we will approach sellers to see if they have interest in selling a name. Or sometimes we'll get referrals. A lot of my business of late has been referral based, meaning that one of my clients is very happy with the service that we provided, and they'll go ahead and say, hey, I have a good friend of mine who's looking to move a name. Do you think you can help them?
Yep.
And at that point, we'll see if we can make the match and see if we can find a good fit for them.
Let me ask you one question about the buyers coming to you, because I would think that, uneducated, not ignorant, definitely ignorant about your process, I would think that 99% of the deals that you do, you're representing the seller because there's so many more sellers in the marketplace than buyers. Is that not the case? How would you represent the number or the percentage of sellers that you represent versus buyers that you represent?
It's another great question. I think that in our marketplace and in the brokerage world that we live in, I think it's important to have a fair balance of both. I always strive to have 50-50, 50% of my sellers and 50% of my buyers.
Wow.
What I've done over the last year and a half was I've really focused on the buyer channel, establishing relationships not only with domain investors, but certainly domain end users, people that would benefit the most from having that particular asset. And then if I can kind of keep my buyer channel and my seller channel in check, typically it's a win-win situation for everybody.
Yeah.
Of late, we've seen a lot of inventory. So like you mentioned previously, the inventory that's out there right now, there's such an influx. There's so much more supply than there is demand.
Right.
So it's very tough to kind of negotiate that and see if we could find more buyers to offset the sellers that are on the market. But every day is a challenge. Every day is, that's what we do. So it's very enjoyable.
So Joe, one of the things you also said was that when a buyer comes to you and has a need, I need a 4-letter brandable name, or I need something in the education space, or whatever their requirements are, then you said you go to the marketplace and you look at what's available.
Correct.
Now that's a very interesting statement, because most people, most sellers, most domain investors want to have their portfolios available for people like you to look at, so that you can, if you see something that exactly matches their need, the customer's need, then you can contact the seller. How can a domain investor that has a portfolio that is available for sale make sure that a broker like you has access to look through the list?
So we always encourage our clients, and even people we don't work with, to submit their lists to us. What we have internally is a search tool that allows us to upload that list, so that if there's ever a type of inventory that my team is looking for, all we have to do is search by keyword. It makes our lives a lot easier. So if you tell me that you're looking for assets in the telecommunication space, I can go in and pull every asset from just about every major domainer that's out there out of my inventory list. If I don't have it, we also have external relationships that are established. Some are co-broker relationships. Some are just other organizations that we work with, just so we can try and find the inventory that meets the needs of our clients.
Okay, so if I have domain names for sale, I can send you my list. You'll put it into the domain holding system, and then if any of your team has a need for a domain name that I own, they'll understand that it's mine and have my contact information in there.
That's exactly right, and
Okay.
we encourage our clients to do
And
that.
if I have my domains listed at domainnamesales.com or Afternic or something like that, will your system also search those, or is it better for me to email the list directly to you?
Ideally, we'd like to have a copy of the list ourselves so that we can upload it directly, because again, you can't really track what's been sold, what hasn't been sold.
Right.
But with that being said, we do work with certainly with domain name sales and some of the other major players that are out there to try and help our clients find the right inventory.
Yeah. Okay. And if other investors are like me and I buy a domain name a week or a couple a week, I don't want to inundate you with emails every week. How is it best to update sort of my portfolio in the domain holdings database?
So what we ask our clients to do is quarterly to send us an updated list. What we can do is we can just upload that list pretty quickly. It takes a matter of minutes depending on the size of the list. We have clients that, I'll email multiple times a day and they'll email me back multiple times a day because they're always buying.
Right.
As a result, we'll be able to upload the inventory, but we prefer to have it on a quarterly or monthly basis is typically.
That makes sense. Okay, and we're going to go over your contact information at the end of the show if people want to email those to you. So you have a buyer that comes to you looking for a domain name. You search through your system and try and find if there are any matching domains that match the requirements.
Sure.
What's your next step after that?
Usually after that is I will put together a list based on keyword or specific requests from the buyer. I'll try and narrow it down because typically when we're sending these lists out, they could be hundreds of assets. I'll ask the buyers to comb through the list and see if there's anything that pops out to them. If there is, then we can narrow it down based on that specific keyword. Maybe go back to the drawing board, try and find more inventory, and push those ideas out to the potential buyers. Internally at Domain Holdings, we have a very good support group that allows, all they do is they generate inventory ideas for us. So on a regular basis, we're constantly getting new inventory ideas to float out to our potential buyers. So every day I'm sending new inventory ideas out. And as a result, it's all about, the more people you can touch, the better chance you're going to have of getting a deal done. So
Definitely.
Again, it's all about making the match.
Yeah. So when I opened up this show, Joe, I thought we would focus on sales of domain names, so outbound sales, but you flipped it on me and you talked about buyers. So I want to continue the process of buying, but then I want to switch over to selling. So like if I'm a domain investor and I have a domain name that I want to sell and I'd like you to represent me, what would be your process to go through to sell it? So let's finish up the buying example. So you and your team generate different ideas for the buyer.
Correct.
And then you go back to the buyer and you say, here are some different domain names that fit your requirements. You explain it to them, I assume?
We do.
Because a lot of them aren't obvious.
Some of the buyers are, they're pretty well educated. They understand the process and they understand, they have specific needs that they're looking for.
Yeah.
So that the education is not as important there. But if we need to, we're happy to either get on the phone or, a Skype conversation with our clients and explain to them the value of the asset. What's the search volume? What's the cost per click? All of those things are very important at the end of the day. And, again, my number one priority for every client that I work with on a regular basis, or even people that I've never talked to before, is to establish that credibility, to explain to them that I am indeed an expert and understand the field. And I think it makes them more comfortable. And then we give them, at the end of the day, we don't want anybody to ever have buyer's remorse.
Yeah.
If you have a buyer that comes to the table, the last thing you want is for them to feel like they put too much money on the table or they're not happy with their purchase decision.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
Sure.
The fact that nobody wants to feel like they put too much money on the table. So when you provide the list of possible domain names to the buyer who has the need, do you also provide pricing?
It's a very good question. I mean, typically we do not. the way that I like to operate is, unless I have somebody who is very interested in an asset, and usually you can feel them out. If you get them on the phone, you can take your time and you can feel them out as to what their intention really is.
Mm-hmm.
If I just have somebody who I call fishing, meaning they're just looking for a price on an asset, I usually will give them guidelines.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is we're accepting offers in the mid six-figure range. We're accepting offers in the low six-figure, upper five-figure. Then usually what that does is that'll qualify the person. By qualifying them, that'll allow me to distinguish whether or not they're an actual buyer. If I don't think that they're actually qualified, then I'll just kind of skip the process and just, either we can potentially get something done or we can't. But I don't usually like to give pricing out unless I believe that I'm really dealing with a qualified buyer that's ready to move.
Okay, so great question that I have a side question for. I was just sent an inquiry this morning for a domain name that I own. They were totally just fishing. Instead of, and I never quote any prices, would you recommend that I try and qualify them by saying I'm looking for, how did you phrase it, low five figures, just to see if they're around that range, if I'm willing to take anything from 5,000 up to 20,000?
Yeah, that's exactly what I would do is, I will go back to them. And the first thing that I'll say to them is, we're accepting offers in the low five-figure range. And right away, that'll qualify them. They'll say, well, I thought that it might be, $500.
Right.
In which case, the conversation can come to an end right there because I cannot obviously help them. If they say, okay, five-figure range, that's within my budget, what are we talking about? Then we can escalate the conversation and start talking pricing.
Great. So low, what ranges do you typically use? Low five-figure range? Do you ever say high four-figure range, or do you just go with low five-figure range?
Depends on the asset.
Okay.
I have clients that I've been working with for a long time that have a couple of the lower-end assets that they want to move, and it really depends on the inventory. We look at the inventory closely. We evaluate the value of what we perceive to be the fair market value for the asset and what we think we could move it for. And, if the buyer is interested, then we'll certainly take the conversation to the next level.
What dollar amount ranges do you roughly associate with high four-figure range, low five-figure range, high five-figure range?
So high four figures, I would say probably, in the $8,000 range.
Okay.
I think that's a fair assumption there.
Yep.
Low five figures would be anywhere from, I've seen $10,000 offers on up to, $25,000 offers.
Okay.
Mid five figures, obviously pushing the $35,000 to $65,000 range. Mid to upper. So again, you can classify it in different ways. I had a client this morning that I reached out to who I thought would be a perfect end user fit for one particular domain name. And I said to them that we're accepting offers in the low to mid six-figure range. So what that does is that will kind of, in their mind, or at least in my mind, that says that, well, the buyer might, or the seller might consider $150,000, but they might need closer to $500,000. So if we can kind of hit something in that sweet spot and get some interest back, it's kind of, it's a game that we play all the time.
Yeah. When I hear low to mid any range, I immediately think low. I watch a lot of those pawn shows on TV that I enjoy the negotiation. And
Sure.
If somebody comes in and says, yeah, I'm looking for $200 to $400 for this autographed Mickey Mantle baseball card. Okay, $200.
Exactly. And I think that's human nature. I think we're all programmed to, when they hear a certain range, to go on the low end of that range. But again, that automatically, if I tell somebody that I'm looking for an offer in the low to mid five-figure range, and they come back to me with a $10,000 offer, well, they're qualified. Meaning that they're willing to spend $10,000 and I'm asking $40,000 for it. I think I can get them up to $30,000 to try and get a deal done.
Yeah.
So it's all about psychology and just trying to understand the buyer, trying to help the seller to extract the value that they're looking for, and try and balance both sides really.
Okay, so the buyer comes to you, and when we started this conversation, I was originally thinking that this was like a company, like an established firm that's looking to rebrand, but actually it could just be any Joe Schmo, any single guy like me, just saying, hey, I'm interested in this domain name, contacting you to do the deal for them. So it could be somebody that somebody that's qualified, all the way down to somebody reaching out from a Gmail address that you know nothing about. That's the buyer.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah,
So the buyer contacts you. You look through you ask them what they're looking for, get the requirements. You look through your inventory, you generate ideas through you and your team. You provide those to the end user and educate them on the process if they need it. You don't provide any pricing, but as part of the requirements that you gathered at the beginning, you were looking for a range that they were willing to spend. So do you only give them names roughly in the range that they're looking to spend? You're not going to show them, Capital.com, which is over 7 figures for a small financing or title company or whatever in Hoboken.
That's exactly right. I mean, there's no advantage to me. If I have a $1 million domain name that I'm trying to sell to someone, it would make no sense for me to go after that small business in Hoboken. There's no value there. There's just no way that we're going to get a deal done at that level. So I would say it's not advantageous at all for me to send a client that's looking for a $10,000 domain, a 7-figure domain name.
Right.
It's just kind of a waste of time. I'm spinning my wheels for nothing.
Yeah. Okay. So after you've educated them and presented them, they're either going to like one of the domains or not like any of them. Is that typically how they fall? Binary
Exactly.
like that?
More often than not, our clients have a tendency to be picky, which we totally understand and we respect. So I don't usually think that we're ever going to get it on the first try. Mm-hmm. Occasionally it happens, but if it doesn't happen, we just go back to the drawing board. The luxury of our business is that there's so much inventory out there. Mm-hmm. There are so many possible names that people could consider. Things that I can never begin to. I mean, on my desk every single day I keep a thesaurus just so I can get name ideas, because again, there's so much out there, and the sky's the limit in what we do.
Yeah. So what's the typical next step from there, Joe?
So you have a buyer that comes to the table, and we share a set of inventory with them. If they're interested in one of the names, maybe they're interested in 5 of the names, we'll then go back to the seller to start to see if we can get a pricing range. Mm-hmm. Some of the sellers have already given us pricing. At that point, we have to make sure that A, the asset is still available for sale, B, that the pricing that they've given us in the past is still indicative of the current market value. Mm-hmm. If it's not, we'll then get the fair price, and then we'll go back to the buyer and kind of give them that range that we're talking about. We have these 5 assets that are maybe within your sweet spot in the low 5-figure range. Would you like to make an offer? Mm-hmm. Well, I want to do some research and think about it. And the biggest hurdle that we have with buyers is that we need to educate them.
Right.
Again, some of these guys are very educated. Some of them have absolutely no idea what the value of a domain really is.
Sure.
So we just use as many third-party tools as we can, and certainly our expertise to be able to educate our clients.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it reminds me of one of the TV shows. I keep talking about TV. I don't really watch that much TV, I swear, but it's like Property Virgins. You get people who want to buy a house, but they just have no idea how much housing is in a particular town with a certain, school district or what have you. So a lot of education that needs to be done, I assume, with new people to the domain name industry.
That's exactly right. We assume that all of our clients have absolutely no idea what we do and how we go about doing it, and really what the true value is of an asset. Mm-hmm. And our job as brokers is to educate people. Mm-hmm. So typically that's the best time to get on a phone call with a buyer or seller at that point, is because, again, you have to bridge the gap. There's always a gap. You might have a seller that wants $100,000 for a name, and you have a buyer who's willing to pay 10. My job is to bridge that gap. And if I can't do it, I need to be able to see through that so I can move on to the next opportunity.
Yeah. So you go back and forth with the buyer and the seller. You confirm the assets available, the pricing. You narrow it down to 1 or 2 domains. And then basically it's just negotiation with you as the middleman?
That's exactly right. And one of the advantages that our company provides is that we have the ability to not only do the negotiation on behalf of the buyer or the seller, but we also handle all of the paperwork, we handle all of the escrow, and then we handle all of the transfer. So it's a pretty smooth transition, and so the buyer, let's say that they want to go after XYZ.com, and the seller has a valuation on that of $25,000. I'll go back to my buyer and say, well, we need an offer somewhere in the low to mid 5-figure range. They'll come back and offer $10,000. At that point, it's my job to go back to the seller and say, we have a current firm offer of X, $10,000 in this case, pending a signed purchase and sales agreement. what that does is that protects us from any liability down the road, because you have a lot of deals where you have both sides that agree in principle to the terms of the deal, but they don't sign paperwork, and then the paperwork never gets done, and we can't be held liable in case that deal goes south. So, it's all about dotting your I's and crossing your T's, really.
Definitely, and that's why having a professional involved is helpful.
Sure.
All right, so let's flip the conversation and talk about your selling process. So I've got a domain name that I think is worth $25,000, Joe. I met you at WebFest. I think you're a nice guy. I think you got all the skills to represent my domain name because maybe for whatever reason. So I'm going to call you up and say, Joe, I want you to sell my domain name for me. What's your first step with me as a seller?
So the first step is to establish the pricing parameters and guidelines. What we'll try and do as a company is we'll try and bring that domain asset, if we think it's warranted, under what we call EBA, or exclusive brokerage agreement. By having the exclusive right to sell that name, I am comfortable with my lead gen team spending the time that's necessary to build those leads, because again, it's a very arduous process. It doesn't happen overnight. And we have a lot of third-party tools that we pay for to allow us to generate those leads. So if I can bring it under EBA out, that'll be my first step. I'll then try.
Okay, so that means that I actually sign an agreement with you and Domain Holdings.
That is correct.
Okay.
Typically, our agreement is about 60 to 90 days.
Oh, that's it?
Yes. So you're not tying, we don't want to tie your asset up for an extended period of time.
Wow, that's great. That shows me that you're actually going to work to sell my domain name. I think a lot of, and I should represent that I have not used a broker in the past to sell, but I'm under this assumption that exclusive domain name agreements last a year, and whether or not you work on my behalf during that entire year, it doesn't matter because I'm locked into that broker for a year. So you're 60 to 90 days, which means that you're going to bust a hump to get it sold if you think that it's sellable to bring me under the exclusive broker within that 60 to 90 days.
Any broker that tells you that they need 6 months or longer to sell a domain name, in my personal opinion, we know within the first 30 days if we're going to be able to sell a name. You're going to know right away if you're doing extensive outreach and you're reaching the proper end user. You're going to know pretty quickly if somebody's interested in the name. I don't like to waste time, because if I'm wasting time on an asset, it's not only hurting my client, it's hurting me as well. And I never want to do that. We always want to do right by our clients. So I believe that 60 to 90 days is plenty of time. But, we always push for the longer period because, again, if we're doing it in our newsletter or so forth. But at the end of the day, my job is to move as many assets as possible for the best possible price.
So I may know you and I may say, hey, Joe, I've got to liquidate this domain name. It's a 15,000 domain name. I'm willing to take 5,000 because I bought it for 3,000. And you may just reach out to your network and try and move it quickly. And that wouldn't be an exclusive deal. But on the ones where you're reaching out to end users, trying to get the maximum dollar amount, you're spending your resources, your team's time, your time on that, which are taking you from other sales, an exclusive brokerage agreement is likely the way you go.
Yeah, I mean, it's ideal for us as brokers because, again, it established that we have the ability to sell that name, and we can then tap into our network, not only with reaching out to end users, because, again, if within 60 days or 30 days, if I can't make contact with that proper end user, I'm not getting success, well, then we'll go after our co-broker channel. We'll then push it out to them because, again, there's co-brokers out there that are very good at what they do. They have an extensive relationship that's been built. And I've done many deals with co-brokers whereby we split the commission. But, again, if you get the deal done, it doesn't matter. I mean, again, we're all in this to try and succeed. So
definitely. Okay, so let's assume that it's an exclusive broker agreement because I think that's the closest analogy to an individual investor who has a domain name that wants to call up some end users or email them and try and sell it. So let's assume that I came to you with a domain name worth at least $10,000 that I would like to sell. I signed an exclusive brokerage agreement with you. The first thing that you and I do is you said, talk about what my pricing range is.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
So I'll look at four main criteria when I'm evaluating a domain name. I like to think that I'm pretty good at valuations. If I'm not sure about a valuation, I'll ask my team internally. Again, we have a great support team to help us evaluate proper assets. But the four things that we look at: cost per click, so CPC is very important, search volume, the competition, how many people are bidding on that particular keyword, and then obviously other comps in the marketplace. What other names have sold and what have they sold for? It's almost like commercial or residential real estate. It's very similar to that. So once I come up with a valuation, I'll then go back to the client and say, well, I think it's actually worth $25,000, not 10. Maybe you're leaving money on the table, or I think you need to set your expectation a little bit lower, and this is why. And then I'll explain to them why that's the case.
Okay, so in all four of those criteria, more is better. If the CPC is higher, it's better. If the search volume is higher, it's better. If the competition is higher, that means that there's more potential buyers for it. And if the comps, if there are a lot of them at higher amounts, that's better.
That's exactly right. If we get all four, then we're dealing with an asset that is probably very marketable, very movable in a pretty short period of time.
Okay, so sign the agreement. I told you my range that I'm looking for. You did your own valuation of the domain name based on those four criteria. You came back to me. We chatted about it. We agreed on a range. Do you agree on a price or a range with the end user?
So what we do is we have what we call a reserve price. The reserve price is the very lowest possible price that we can sell that asset for. That includes and is inclusive of our commission as well. So if you come to me and you want to net $8,000, I'll say to you, well, let's put it under reserve at $10,000, because again, we have to build our commission into that. If I think it's marketable at that range, I'm happy we can sign the paperwork today and move forward.
Great. All right. So then once we've agreed on the reserve price, what is your next step?
So after we have established the actual reserve price, what I'll do once we have paperwork signed and everything's ready to go, I will then have my lead gen team start to build leads. That process could take 2 to 3 days to build actual leads per asset. So what I'll do in the interim is I'll start combing through Google. I'll start combing through all of the various tools: Escrow, Google, Yahoo, all of the major search engines, SEMrush, SpyFu. These are all great third-party tools that we use to help find suitable buyers for names. These are people that are bidding on keywords. These are people that are already ranking in the search results. So those are typically the guys that we want to target. I'll start with a general outreach to some of those clients before the leads are actually built. What I mean by that is I'll start in, do a who is search, find out if it's an investor or if it's somebody that is an end user. If I think that it's warranted, I will craft an email to make an introduction and tell them who I am, what I'm doing, and what I'm all about. Usually the response rate on something like that is 1 to 3%. But then what we'll do is once those leads are generated and built, is then we'll start the process of picking up the phone, trying to make contact with that actual person.
Okay, let me stop you there, Joe, because I think we just jumped 3 steps at once, and I want to dig into each one. So after you sign the paperwork, your team does lead generation. So they're off running through every single system to pull in leads. But you and I discussed in the pre-interview that you're a PPC, a search engine guy. You understand how marketing works online because you've done retail. So you'll do your own research also and find out who the heavy hitters are. So you're doing research and you're trying to figure out who is the appropriate person to contact. So let's say that you go to SpyFu and you can see that there is an educational company that is paying $10 per click on a high volume search phrase that matches the domain name. You want to contact that educational company, looking up, which is probably, 100, 500 people, 1,000 people, because those educational companies do a lot of lead gen. How do you do the research to find the right person to contact at that company?
So usually the number one priority is to look for a C-level executive. Somebody that is really the decision maker within the organization. I usually go after the CMO first, which is the chief marketing officer.
Yeah.
Usually in very large corporations, not only do you have a CMO, but you have a CIO, the chief information officer, that could potentially see the true value of the domain name for a project that the company might be working on down the road. So maybe they're the actual decision maker. Sometimes you're dealing with the CFO, the chief financial officer, who controls all the finances and everything like that. Recently a deal was closed where I dealt exclusively with the CFO. I've dealt with CEOs. domain administrators. It really depends. Legal
Yeah.
departments.
Yeah.
Again,
So if it's a smaller company, let's say that it's a $10 million mortgage company, the owner is likely the CEO or the president. And if you go to the about page of the website that you found through SEMrush or SpyFu that you knew they're advertising, and you see his name and you go to the Who Is records and you get his email address, bang, right there. Or you can go to the about page. Sometimes they have they have the owner's email address right there. So you're generally looking for the CEO or the president of a smaller type of company, 10
Right.
million or less. But if it's a $100 million company, they're not going to have their email addresses on the website, most likely. In some cases, you won't even see the chief marketing officer listed.
That's exactly right. So what we'll do then is we have another tool related to data.com. Data.com is a great opportunity to extract the decision maker within some of the largest corporations.
Oh, wow.
LinkedIn is a great source. A lot of people don't realize, but if you go onto LinkedIn, you can really make connections with people. Specifically, if you have an executive or the higher end membership with LinkedIn, you can send them what they call an in-mail. Typically they don't respond to the in-mails, but at least you put your name out there and you make them aware that you have this asset that you're trying to market. Maybe they have some interest. And occasionally, I can't tell you, it's happened many times in the past. People get back to you and they're very interested. They want to talk further. And again, maybe you can't sell them that asset that you're marketing, but maybe down the road there's another asset that makes sense for them. So,
yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So you're using a whole bunch of different tools, and for somebody that's looking to try and find that right person, they can go to data.com. I've used Info USA in the past. They actually have a business search capability. Have you ever used that database?
Yeah, we're familiar with Info USA. We've used them, but we found that some of the data was a little bit stale. So we try and steer away from that a little bit. And that's part of the problem that you run into with all of the data companies that are out there. Is
Yeah.
that the information that they have might not be as up to date.
Yeah.
Jigsaw is another one that's pretty good. There's a bunch of. I mean, the internet is so great now because you can find anything about anybody very quickly. We use all of these tools every day at our disposal and advantage to really try and talk to the right people.
Yeah, well, and you get proficient at them when you use them every day. So
Exactly.
you're doing your own research on who to contact while your team at Domain Holdings is also pulling together a lead generation portfolio for you. And then once you have that information, either your information or your team's lead gen information, then your first step of outreach is an email?
Typically, it's an email, just to get the process started. And again, in most instances, if I send 100 emails, I might get a 1 to 3% response rate. 3% is really good, meaning 3 people write back to me.
Right.
Once sometimes in the Who Is information, if we're talking about a smaller company, there might be a telephone number associated with that. And I'll pick the phone right up and dial that number quickly to see if we can make contact with the right decision maker at the company.
Now, will you, and I want to ask you about the phone, but let me ask you about the email before we move there. What do you typically say in your first email out to a potential buyer?
First of all, I introduce myself. Hi, my name is Joe Uddeme. I'm a domain broker with Domain Holdings Group. Sometimes I'll say Director of Business Development. I have an asset that I think might be of very interest to your company. The domain asset is this. According to Google, the search volume for this particular asset is this. And then I'll just get into some basic details. I'd love to discuss this opportunity with you. I think it would be a great advantage and acquisition for your company. There's branding capability, yada, yada, yada. I don't want to get into too many details, but in essence, I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to get aligned with your goals and objectives and try and help you out.
Okay, so you present yourself, you present the offer, and you're asking for them to contact you back.
That's exactly right.
And so do you ever feel, or do people ever, recipients of the email ever say to you like, hey, I've got a domain name. I don't want to buy another one. Like, that's just a lot of work to have to switch things over. And why do I want to, I don't even know if this one, so they have resistance to purchasing something else that's going to cost them more and require them to do more work.
It's exactly the case, and it doesn't happen all the time, but for the most part, people do exactly what you just said. And the way that we overcome that, or the way that we combat that, is we try and explain to them that premium.coms not only retain their value, but typically they increase in value over time. So they don't necessarily need to rebrand themselves under this name. Maybe they just want to do a simple redirect of the traffic that's coming in and just capitalize on that traffic. And a lot of the names that we've been able to sell has been going that route. We don't necessarily want you to rebrand your company. That's one option, but it's not the only option. So you have to look at everything accordingly. Maybe they have a brand that has been struggling for a period of time. So the first thing I like to do after we actually establish contact is to listen to the client. Listening is the most important thing that we do. You don't just want to be on the offensive right away and just say, oh, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm selling, blah, 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 because you only have one chance to make an impression on these people.
Right.
And if especially if you get the right decision maker.
Yeah.
So it's really important to weed through that and just to explain to them that, there's no hard sell approach here. It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
This is what we have. This is how it's going to benefit you. This is why we think it's a good idea.
So you send the first email. You said that if there is a phone number in the Who Is records, you'll immediately pick up the phone and call them as well. Do you wait a certain period of time between when you send the email and when you make that phone call?
Usually 5 to 10 minutes. So I give the chance for the email to land in the inbox, and then I'll call that person and see if I can connect with them. Depending on the day of the week, there's different times that I think present an advantage to making a phone call and reaching a decision maker.
Like which?
So most decision makers, at least in my opinion, can be reached first thing in the morning, so very early in the morning, or after 6 o'clock in the evening. You wouldn't be surprised at how many true C-level executives are still on the job after typical business hours.
Right.
Fridays are great days. Fridays are days that usually people don't have too much to do. As a result, you might get a CEO who's sitting in his office tying up loose ends. Maybe he's watching the stocks on the on the computer. Maybe he picks up the phone. There's been many deals that have happened by just getting that right person on the phone, explaining to them what it is that we do. Most people would call 10 o'clock in the morning on a typical workday. I think if you're really trying to get somebody on the phone, the best thing to do is to try earlier than that. First thing in the morning, 8 a.m., 7:30. If you're up, again, this business that we're in is 24 hours a day. So there's no,
Well, and especially because you're calling at the local time for that business. So if they're in Hawaii, you're getting up really early, I think. Anyways, and so you'll either, so early morning, 7:30, 8 a.m., or after 6 p.m. And one of the advantages of calling late like that is that you usually bypass the receptionist or the gatekeeper who's trying to prevent you from talking to people, and then you can press in dial by name or just call the whoever picks up. It might be the CEO.
So the gatekeepers at most of these companies, and you just raised a great point, their number one job is to deflect you, to do whatever they can to make sure that you don't make the connection that you're looking to try and make. And the gatekeeper, you can't blame them. I mean, that's what they get paid to do. But our job is to try and weed through that and get to the decision maker. It's not always easy. It doesn't happen all the time. But if you keep on it and you stay persistent, I love the word persistence in our business because persistence pays off.
Do you have any tricks that you use with the gatekeeper if you happen to call during work hours? Like you sent an email, you know that the person opened the email because you tracked it, and then you want to give them a call directly, but you got caught by the gatekeeper?
Yeah, what I'll do is one of the biggest tricks in the book is if you have an actual email address of a C-level executive or the decision maker, and you're talking to the gatekeeper on the phone, is as soon as you hang up the phone, you send another email to the decision maker and say, by the way, I just spoke to your receptionist. She sounds like a very nice person. I'd love to discuss this with you because I know that she can't make the actual decision. And sometimes, to be honest with you, I'll send 5 emails in a matter of an hour to a client, and they'll call me back because, you don't want to be a total, you don't want to be a turnoff, but you got to pester people. You really have to stay on top of them.
Right. You want to be proactive. You don't want to just wait for things to come to you. And I deal in sales a lot also with magazine sales, and it takes a certain number of contacts with a person to rise up their priority list and make sure that, they could want to do a deal with you, but they're just so busy and so many other distractions and priorities in life that, hey, I'll get to you later because you only sent me one email.
That's exactly right. And the truth of the matter is that at Domain Holdings, we don't have the ability of an inbound lead flow. So everything that we do is outbound, and it's very important to make sure that you kind of you stay on top of your game. You really have to be in the forefront. You have to be in contact with people all the time, even if they're not the right decision maker. The harder you push, the better results that you get. I mean, again, I think you and I spoke about this as well, but it's all about the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. Really.
Right. So let's say you call, you call after your email was opened, it was read, you get to the gatekeeper, the receptionist transfers you, surprisingly, to the CEO's or the chief marketing officer or whomever's voicemail or extension, but it goes to voicemail. Do you leave a message or do you not leave a message?
Absolutely. Anytime you have an opportunity to, even if you're not making actual contact, if you can leave them a message, you want to be as clear and concise as you can. You don't want to ramble on. You want to make it as simple as possible. Who I am, why I'm calling you, what the benefit is to your company, how I can help you down the road. It's not just about one deal and done. I try and make that clear to everybody that I've ever worked with. I want to work with you for many years to come. So if you can, anytime you think of domains, I want you to call me. It doesn't matter how simple, how small it is. I want to make them comfortable. And if I can do that and leave a 30-second message and just say, hey, I'm Joe. This is what I do. This is who I am. This is who I'm with. This is how I can help you. Please give me a call back. The typical response rate on something like that is less than 5%. But again, tomorrow's another day.
Yeah.
So you pick up the phone again and you try them again, or you try them again the same afternoon and just explain to them. Worst case scenario is they're going to say no.
Right.
And, and again, it's like closing a deal.
Yeah.
You go back to a buyer or seller, you set the expectation. If they say no, then you move on.
Actually, isn't the worst case scenario where they lead you on, but they're really not interested?
That happens sometimes as well. Again,
like the best case scenario is somebody says yes. The middle case scenario is somebody says no, because at least you can just cut your losses and move on to somebody else who might be interested.
But you have to be able to, a good broker has to be able to weed through that. You have to be able to understand that if they're, full of malarkey and they're not, they're just wasting your time,
right,
or if they're really indeed interested.
Yeah.
And again, the goals and objectives concept, in my opinion, is very important, because not only would it qualify your buyer or seller in that case, but because it works on both sides, but if you're talking to somebody and you say you just want to get aligned with their goals and objectives, what are your domain goals? What have you purchased this year? What are your plans for the next 6 months? And again, these are simple questions, but not only are you qualifying them, but you can weed through the BS and really, decide whether or not they're a suitable buyer for a name.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so you emailed, and then if there is a phone number, you call. If there isn't a phone number, what do you do in that case?
What I'll do is we use a CRM system, which is Salesforce, and I think you want to cover that as well. But what I'll do is I'll make a note in Salesforce. I'll put them in as a lead. And then if my lead gen team is able to generate a lead, I'll cross-reference that lead with this prospect that I just contacted. So I'll look and see if there's some type of similarity or another decision maker within the company. If there's not, I have access to go into data.com myself or one of the other tools and pull the information that I require on that particular company. I can't tell you how much information you can find when you just go to somebody's website. Company websites are great.
Yeah.
I mean, most companies that are out there have bios on employees and employers and people and what they're all about. And all you have to do is pull a little information, cross-reference it in a search, and next thing you know, you have the right contact. But again, if we don't have the phone number, I'll put a note in Salesforce. If we can cross-reference that with the leads that are generated from the lead gen team, then I'll go back to them and I'll start the outbound outreach via phone.
Okay. All right, so you send an email, you make a phone call, then you go to your CRM system, your customer relationship management system, and you say, emailed and called John Doe at so-and-so to try and sell XYZ domain. And then what happens from there with that lead? Do you put in a follow-up in Salesforce to remind you?
That's exactly right. We set reminders all the time.
Okay.
So, as a result, if I think it's somebody that is going to benefit from that asset the most, I'll set a reminder for the next morning.
Oh, the next morning.
Exactly. I'll follow right up with them. I don't mess around. Sometimes, again, I'll reach out to people 5 times in the same day.
Yeah.
It really depends on the opportunity. And, the biggest thing that we realize in this business or any business when you're trying to do sales is that you really have to contact people 7 to 10 times before you make the connection.
7 to 10 times just to make a connection with them.
That's exactly
Just
right.
to get them on the phone and talk about the opportunity.
That's exactly
And
right.
so every single time you're saying, here's who I am, here's what I have to offer, here's how it's going to benefit you, and I want to determine if you have interest in discussing it further.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the basic who, what, where, why, and how. If you can answer those questions in an email, or if you can answer those questions quickly on the phone, everybody benefits.
Okay.
Again, you only have 1 second to really
So
hit.
a reminder just for the next day. And then let's say what would that reminder be? If you've called and emailed, what would the reminder be? Another email or another phone call or both?
Both.
Both.
Depending on if you got any response. First thing I'll do is I'll send another email out. Just as a follow-up, hey, this is Joe Uddeme from Domain Holdings. Just wanted to follow up and make sure you received my last correspondence. I'm available this afternoon to talk. By doing that, you're kind of setting the tone right away that you want to speak to this person, you have something important to discuss with them. And, always give people an opportunity to see in an email that they can schedule a meeting with you quickly. Give them times that you're available.
Yeah.
The good thing about that is you can say, I have 5 times available this afternoon. Let me know what works for you and I'll call you up.
Yeah.
Try and keep the process pretty painless, really.
Okay, so let's say that day that you're doing the first follow-up, you do a follow-up email, you do a follow-up phone call, no response back. What's your next step?
Next step is just to stay on top of them. I'll set another reminder for usually later in the week. I won't do another follow-up the next day. If I start off on a Monday and I follow up on a Tuesday, I'll then set a reminder for that Friday. Again, Fridays are pretty good days to reach decision makers. If sometimes my day gets away from me and I just don't have an opportunity to follow up with everybody, that might roll over to the following Monday. But you always stay on top of that lead. At the bare minimum, we want to touch base with people or try and reach them 7 to 10 times because, if we can't get them after that, sometimes we'll just have to move on because there's so many other opportunities out there. Some people call you back 5 months after you reached out to them.
Yeah.
It happens all the time. You'll get a decision maker that says, "Oh, I just saw this in my junk mail from 5 months ago," and you try and explain to them, that the asset is no longer available, or maybe, maybe there's other opportunity. But again, it's all about establishing relationships.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so the number of reminders that you put into the system corresponds with this 7 to 10 times, and you may do it on the 10 times side. 10 contacts via email or phone if you think that end user is worth it, or 7 times if you don't think it's going to be worth it. Do you ever do any contacts besides email and phone? Like, will you, I was reading a story about chocolate.com, which is currently up for sale, where certain people in the industry were reached out, certain journalists received chocolate business cards announcing the sale of it along with some press materials. If the domain name is high value, will you do certain things to try and get broader appeal?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we've become very good at is sending out press releases and explaining to our clients. Recently, there's a 7-figure name that we took to market, and we just did a press release on, and you'd be amazed at the people that respond to the press release.
Yeah.
Some of the people are no good, but there are a handful of clients that you can get, or relationships that you can establish out of that. So press releases are a huge opportunity. Typically our brokers focus on phone relationships, email relationships, and then obviously co-broker relationships. But
Gotcha.
Press releases on the higher end assets are very important.
Will you ever do paper letters to the CEOs announcing, to the CEOs of the company that you've called and emailed to try and get them to look at it through some other channel?
Not usually very often. I can tell you in the past, one of the techniques that we've used when we've had an interested buyer in a name and we can't make the connection with the seller is we'll go ahead and we'll send the offer out via certified mail. We'll send our contract with the offer that's presented. It'll get delivered to the P.O. box or the postal box that's associated with that particular account in the WHOIS. And we've gotten responses on that in the past as well, which is pretty unique. I mean, it doesn't happen very often, but we've done it before and it's worked. So that's another way to get through to people.
Great. All right. So just looking through my script here, we've tackled a lot of these, Joe. A lot of great information here. I feel like I can actually go out and maybe do this now. Let's talk about the CRM system. You mentioned that at Domain Holdings, you are using Salesforce.com, which is sort of the, the Cadillac. I'm not even sure if you can use that. Cadillac is making a comeback, aren't they? It is the Cadillac of customer relationship management systems. It's also an expensive one, but it's completely comprehensive. We used to use it at GE. What do you like about Salesforce as a CRM system for managing customers and inquiries and leads and people you've reached out to versus just a spreadsheet?
Well, I think the advantages really are the reminders that you can set for yourself. I think that when I come into the office every morning, there's a series of reminders that pop up. We also have chatter. So the chatter feature on Salesforce is great. It allows me to interact with my colleagues in-house. Maybe they're working on a new piece of inventory that they brought in. Maybe I wouldn't normally know about that inventory. Our lead gen team, when they generate leads for us, it comes up in the chatter and it says, you just received 30 new leads for this particular asset.
Oh, cool.
Right then and there, it kind of sets the tone for my day.
Yeah.
It allows me to see who I need to follow up with, who I need to start reaching out to, and that's usually how I'll tackle it. Every day is something exciting, which is great.
Yeah. So the chatter, is that sort of like a Twitter feed for you? You get to see what's being tagged Joe to do?
That's exactly right. And I can see, and again, I can interact with the other 8 brokers that I'm working with, and every single day we can see the chatter on what's going on and what's being updated. Maybe there's a name that's not under exclusive anymore. So we need to be aware of that so that we make sure that we're not pushing that out in a newsletter or something like that if we don't have the direct access and exclusive to market that any longer.
Got it. I use, I think everybody is very passionate about their own CRM system. And internally for our sales of advertising, we use pipelinedeals.com, which is similar to Salesforce, but it's a startup and, they have a lot to offer. The thing that I like about Pipeline Deals is that every time I make a contact with somebody, I can add a note. I made a phone call. I left a message. I sent an email. I can actually BCC Pipeline Deals, and it goes into the stream. So I can look back and say, oh, yeah, I first met him. His wife's name is so-and-so, and he said he had an interest, but we couldn't close a deal. And then it refreshes my memory. If I did it on a spreadsheet, I'd have to enter it in rows, and it would just wrap unnaturally and very difficult to read. So I'm sure Salesforce is exactly the same. It allows you to look at an entire relationship in one screen.
Absolutely, and the note section is paramount in what we do. I mean, I think it's a very important part of everyday opportunities that we have. Because again, maybe we talk to a client about an opportunity, it didn't pan out, but at least we have that in the notes and we can go back to it. Because when another domain comes along that might be a better fit for them, you have it in the notes and you can go back to them.
Definitely. Awesome. Okay, so we talked about best days and times to call. You basically gave us your sample script that you use in an email online. What do you do when somebody is just, and this is one of my biggest fears, that I'm going to send an email or I'm going to call and people are going to be outraged with me. Like, how dare you call me unannounced, or calling me trying to sell me something, and I think it's sort of, it's similar to real property. If I owned a plot of land or a house, I wouldn't call my next door neighbor and say, hey, do you have an interest in buying this property that I own 1,000 miles away? It seems strange.
We get a lot of clients that, I shouldn't say clients, but people that will write back to us, and sometimes they'll use, obscenities and so forth, and they just will wish every name in the book to you. Why are you contacting me? Who are you? Blah, blah, blah. On the bottom of all of our emails, if we reach somebody via email as an opt-out, they have the ability to opt out. We certainly don't want to piss people off. We're not in the business to piss people off. We're in business to educate and help our clients find the right name that we can. Sometimes, you'll get somebody that just writes you the rudest possible message that you could ever imagine. And, usually we won't respond back to them. In some instances, I will write back, thank you, sorry for the inconvenience. I'm happy to remove you from our list. My number one priority is to try and A, not piss anybody off, but B, to educate, really. I mean, that's what we do. And if you're not interested, that's fine. Most people don't respond back to you if they're not interested. On rare occasions, you'll get somebody that calls you up and they'll start cursing at you or whatever it may be. You just have to stay level-headed. You just have to try and weed through that. I mean, again, there's so many people out there, and we just want to take care of as many as we can.
Yeah, and you strike me as perfectly level-headed, so it makes sense. You want to just repair any damage that's done to a relationship. If somebody writes back and says, I do not like to be contacted without some interest of mine, remove me from your call list, you'll write back and say, sorry for the inconvenience, we'll do so immediately, you won't hear from us again. Maybe they'll contact you in the future if hey, I have a domain name. What was that guy that emailed me? Sure. But if they're just irate, screw you, then you just won't even respond. You'll just take them off your list, never talk to them again, because it might just further outrage them if you email them again.
That's exactly right. And I, to be honest with you, in the past, we've had, a lot of people in our business have multiple email addresses. Mm-hmm. So we might reach out to somebody and they might opt out under one email address, and then we might make contact with them under a separate email address, and they get infuriated. And, our number one priority is to try and make sure that we correct the issue if we can. And, we never want to spam people. Yeah. We never want to, reach out to people multiple times unless they're interested in hearing what we have to say. So we try and take every precaution we can and every step to make sure that our reputation is not tarnished.
Yeah. Hey, Joe, I know we were going to keep the interview to an hour. We're a little bit over. Do you have like 5 more minutes so we can talk about negotiations?
Absolutely.
All right. So we've gone through your process. I understand it. And it's basically 7 to 10 times contacting the potential buyer of the domain name through emails, through phone calls. Let's say finally you get that end user on the phone. You've done the exact same thing that you did in the email, that you left in the voicemails, who you are, what you have to offer, the benefit to their business, and trying to get them to tell you what their needs are if they have any. Usually they'd be like, well, I have no need for a domain name, but you emailed me. It sounds like a really good opportunity. I don't want to pass it up. Tell me more about it. So you're educating them. At what point do you get to pricing with the end user?
Usually we allow the end user to ask for the actual price. I will never usually just blurt out the price unless they ask me specifically. I like to engage them, mm-hmm. and by engaging them, you allow them to interact with you, and they can ask the questions and kind of feel like they're in charge of the conversation.
Yeah.
Usually, we try and be as passive as we can. We never want to shove anything down anybody's throat, so it's really important to make sure that you listen. Sales 101 tactic is to listen. Always listen to what people are saying to you. Never try and rebuttal, because if you try and rebuttal, you're not listening to what they're asking you.
Right. Okay, so you're engaging with them, you're asking them questions, you're listening rather than doing all the talking.
That's exactly right.
You wait for them to ask you for the price. Will you throw out a price or will you throw out a range? You know the reserve price.
That's exactly right. We know the reserve price, and we have that card in our pocket. What I'll usually do right away is I'll say, well, we're accepting offers in the low 6-figure range. And then usually what will happen, if they're pretty savvy and they understand the business, is they'll come back and say, well, what's low 6-figure range? Mm-hmm. And I'll say, well, we'll always try and go a little bit higher than the actual ask price, because you need to provide a little bit of negotiation room there. So if the actual reserve price is $100,000, I'll usually go to them and I'll say, well, I think we could probably get a deal done today at $150,000. And then usually there's a pause of some sort, and they'll just kind of take a seat back. Well, I really need to think about it. I think it might be valuable to our company. Before you get them off the phone, you want to set a time to follow up. Mm-hmm. When can I follow up with you? When can I talk to you further about this opportunity? Mm-hmm. You never want to just let them go and hang up the phone.
Right.
The common misconception in sales, at least in general, is that when somebody says no, you quickly hang up the phone and you're done. People are afraid of rejection. We don't want to be rejected. What we want to do is we want to try and establish credibility and set up a separate time to follow up with them. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's tomorrow morning. Maybe he has a board meeting coming up at the end of the week where he wants to pitch the idea to his group, and he wants me to follow up with him on a Monday or whatever it is. I always want to make myself available, because that second call is really when you can get through the meat and see if you can get a deal done.
Definitely. So whether it's a $100,000 domain or a $10,000 domain, you're probably going to bump it up by 50% in order to have some negotiation room. So if If my reserve is 8, you're telling him, or if my reserve is 10,000, you're going to say, well, we're looking for low 5 figures. He's going to say, well, what price were you thinking? And you say, well, if we were to do the deal today, I could probably get it closed with the seller at 15,000. Can you do that today? And then they may say, well, I don't want to jump into this. I got to think about it. Are you ever going to retract that $15,000 offer if it were done today?
So what we normally do is we try and establish a time frame. This offer would be valid for 7 days. What that does is that kind of puts the sense of urgency in the sale.
Yeah.
You always need a sense of urgency with any deal that you do. So if you can establish that, maybe it's 3 days. Maybe, today's the last day of the month. We need to know by close of business today. If you're close on a deal and you've been talking with buyers or one particular buyer back and forth and you think he's very interested, you think you can get a deal done, the only holdup is price, is that you extend an offer to them that's close to your reserve, but maybe not 50% higher than your reserve, and say this offer will only be valid till the close of business today.
Okay.
Usually the guys will move on that pretty quickly, one way or the other.
Are there any other ways to establish a sense of urgency besides saying this offer is good for 7 days or 3 days?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, what we've done in the past, and sometimes you'll get a client that has a very hot domain name, and you'll have interest by other parties. The number one priority is to try and get the deal done, but you explain to the client, well, I don't know how much longer this one's going to be available because there are 3 other parties that are expressing interest in the asset. What that tells them is that there is a sense of urgency that needs to be created.
Right.
We try and use that as what I call a leverage tactic. It's, you only do it when you really have something on the table and something that's legitimate. It's kind of tricky, but, it's another tactic that you can definitely use.
Nice. All right. And let's see. Any other way besides setting a timeline to try and get the deal to close more quickly? To try and get them to sign the paperwork and get into escrow?
Well, what we do is we'll tell the client right away that we want to make the process as easy as possible for them. A lot of people get concerned when you start talking about contracts and paperwork, escrow processes, how they make sure that they don't get in the transaction. So right away, if, a lot of clients will come to us and say, well, we don't know domain holdings. We don't know anything about your company. Why would we let you do the escrow? So the opportunity right then and there is to go back to them and say, well, escrow.com is a great third-party source. We're happy to set up escrow.com. They'll handle all the escrow. We can get everything done today. It's a quick process and just kind of, deal with it that way as well. So again, my number one priority is to try and help the client to make them feel comfortable with the purchase, to be there if they have any questions. They can call me on the phone, they can email me, whatever makes sense for them, and just any way we can do to try and help them. Again, we're not in this for one deal and done. We want to make sure that we can help and service our clients for many years.
All right, Joe, here's the final question. You've done a phenomenal job walking us through your process to sell domain names. Some people don't have the time or the inclination to sell their own domain names, but they now realize that you've got a great process, you've got great resources and a support structure. If someone watching this show wants to use you as their broker, how can they do that?
Best way to get in touch with me is to certainly shoot me an email. You can reach me all of the time. I'm always accessible. joe@domainholdings.com. If for some reason I'm traveling, I'm at WebFest or I'm at one of the conferences and I'm not available, my group is always willing and able. The easiest way to get in touch with the group is to send an email to sales@domainholdings.com. You can also reach me via phone. My telephone number is 410-977-0693. Feel free to contact me anytime. If I don't answer, I'll certainly call you back. And I'd love to work with you.
Great. And you're also on Twitter, I think, Joe. Is that correct?
That's correct. The Twitter handle is Uddeme, so it's Juddeme.
Excellent. And the company you work for, Domain Holdings, is also on Twitter @Domain Holdings. If you want to follow Joe or Domain Holdings, we'll have links below this interview. And, Joe, this is the part of the show where I ask the audience to take 30 seconds and reach out and say thanks to you for providing all of this knowledge and tactics and your strategy for how you go about selling domain names. Send an email. Joe just gave you his email address, joe@domainholdings.com. Click on the link just under the video. Send a thank you to Joe on Twitter. Do something. Life is too short to just sit on the sidelines and wait for it to go by. The first step is creating a relationship and starting a conversation, and I'm giving you an excuse to do that. So just click there, say thanks. It's that easy. So Joe Uddeme, Director of Business Development at Domain Holdings, I want to be the first to thank you. It's all the behind-the-scenes stuff that takes place that makes for a successful broker and business. Someone might look at sales and think, I can do that. All I have to do is email and call. But there's clearly a lot to the process, and the process takes 7 to 10 times to actually make a contact, not just to do a deal. And I appreciate you coming on the show, sharing your details of how you do it, and being so open with us. So thanks for being a Domain Sherpa.
Thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate it and look forward to talking to you many more times in the future.
Likewise. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.